And in your packet is a media release on this particular item. And that is that after a long period of time, 2 years, we finally have a decision rendered in the aerial spraying ordinance, locally adopted aerial spraying ordinance, the challenge to that particular ordinance. I'm going to talk procedure a little bit first so we understand that, and then I'll talk a little bit about the opinion letter itself there. Procedurally, where we're at right now is the judge has ruled on a motion for summary judgment and cross motions made by the parties for summary judgment. And what this is everybody agreed there were really no factual issues at all here that needed to be determined, but only questions of law. And everybody put forth their arguments as to what the law actually indicates and how that affects the challenges that were being made. This is an opinion letter at this point. We do not have a final judgment, so there's still steps that have to go forward in order to enter a final judgment. The parties have to review the drafts of those the proposed judgments and get that going here. So this has still got some time before a final local decision is well, a local decision is finalized, let's put it that way. And at that point, that triggers then some time frames for appeal of the decision that's made. And the appeal could come from any party that's involved in this particular matter. And I do want to note that at least what I've heard out there is the intervenors, the local Lincoln County Community Rights, has already indicated their desire to appeal this particular decision based on what the opinion letter has shown. So I anticipate that this matter is not done. That it will actually go forward into the appellate courts and move forward from there. Now, that being said, the judge issued her decision and really made 4 determinations that I think are important for us to consider. And this stuff is actually identified. If you want to go onto the Lincoln County website, we have a measure 21-177 page that's linked to our Lincoln County website. You can see a lot of the filings that have been made by all the parties across the board here. You can see the court's decision and opinion letter, and you can see the press release that contains the materials I'm going to discuss right here in terms of what was actually rendered in the decision. So there, as I said, there were 4 rulings that the court made there. I think it's important to look at all those. First, the court actually granted the counties cross motion for summary judgment on questions that were raised about whether the election was even valid. There was a number of challenges made, and I'm not going to go into a lot of legal detail here, but they can be categorized as both pre-election and post-election challenges to say that the assertion was this should never have come to a vote in the first place. We contested that and we said it should, and that the election was a valid action taken by the voters of Lincoln County. The court agreed with this and actually denied all of the questions and all the challenges based on the validity of the election. That was first ruling. The second was that the court determined, after looking at Oregon case law precedent, and there's a lot of case law precedent sitting out there, but the court determined that state law, and specifically Oregon's Pesticide Control Act, which is ORS Chapter 634, preempts the county from adoption or enforcement of any ordinance, rule, or regulation regarding pesticide sale or use. And therefore, they granted the plaintiff's motion for summary judgment on the question of preemption. And the effect of that is that it renders the ordinance in the measure void and unenforceable. That was the second major ruling. The third ruling the court made was that in connection with the preemption question, they denied the county's motion that at least the ordinance should survive and be applicable to county actions on county-owned land. And the court here distinguished between the question of an ordinance regulating pesticide use and the exemption which we argued applied here, which allows the county to adopt its own policy regarding the use of pesticides on property owned by the county. So making a distinction between this ordinance as a regulation and the adoption of a policy. It doesn't change the viewpoint that we have. We're not all of a sudden going to go and spray county-owned lands, aerially spray. We have not done that, and we would continue with the policy of not doing that. But that particular question, we were denied our motion that the ordinance at least survive for that portion. And then finally, the court denied the Intervenor Lincoln County Community Rights cross motion on summary judgment. They had argued that there are an inherent and inalienable rights of local community self-government under the U.S. and Oregon constitutions that allow this local enactment to supersede contrary state law. And the court basically said and found that there's no Oregon case that supports the intervener's assertions, and even noted that the intervener's attorney conceded that no Oregon court has recognized an actionable right of local community self-government. And so, following precedent that is very clear under Oregon law, where local enactments are found incompatible with state law in an area of substantive policy and explicit preemption, state law displaces the local law. And that's the law that the court found, and that's what the court ruled. I want to note, because I think it's important for everybody to recognize, that Judge Bachart actually went to great lengths to explain her decision. This is a pretty detailed decision, actually contrary to what I've seen in some other cases that are similar to this. And she concluded by expressing that the decision was based on questions of law and not of policy. I think that's extremely important as people look at this. And here's the actual quote that she has in her decision. In granting plaintiff's motion for summary judgment and declaring the ordinance to be preempted in its entirety by the Oregon Pesticide Control Act, the court makes no choice among values or competing interests of the parties. Such choices are political, not a judicial decision. There is no determination within the decision of weighing or balancing community decision-making authority over that of the state or vice versa. So that's kind of a summary of where the judgment is. Well, stay tuned to see what the next steps are and where this goes.
Okay.
Is there, so you said basically we're waiting for this kind of opinion statement to be finalized. Is there a timeline that's in place for when that becomes finalized, or do we just...
No, the parties, the plaintiff was directed to prepare the judgment based on the ruling and the opinion letter. And we're not sure what that time frame will be, because that has to be reviewed by all the parties and all the attorneys for the parties before it goes back to the court. The court has to accept that judgment once that goes through. But in this particular case, I'm not speculating as to time frames. There are some very specific time frames once that judgment is entered in terms of rights to appeal, when you have to actually file for an appeal and then respond to the appeal in doing that. And we'll monitor those very closely as that comes
So we've been in a large holding pattern. We got this opinion statement. Now we're back in a holding pattern.
Holding pattern for a period of time.
Okay.
It will not be anywhere near the length of time that it's taken to get this decision at this point.
Okay.
And I would note, and it probably is important to note, that the court actually apologized to all the parties for taking so long to render the decision. There were circumstances occurring. Those of us who know, the makeup of the courts and what's happened with the local judiciary in terms of some health issues and other things going on, that the court has been extremely swamped with all kinds of actions, and they have, by law, they're required to deal with, for instance, criminal matters before they can take up civil matters. So the court actually apologized, and I haven't seen something like that in a long time in terms of it taking so long to actually render the decision. But she also wanted to explain fully what her positions were.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Belmont.